It seems to me, just from a lot of the books and stuff or podcasts I've been listening to recently, there is probably a sweet spot for acquisition. And then after that, it is probably not worth it.
When Google bought YouTube, there was this famous all hands where, the Google leadership was asked at one point. They were like, hey, did we pay too much? Like, I think we paid way too much for YouTube. And they basically said, there's no way that we paid the right amount. We either paid way too much or we paid way too little. And there's no chance that we actually nailed this price.
But I am interested, if you were presented the opportunity again to write a book, would you do it?
For some reason, people have, if you say that, oh, I wrote a book, or oh, I wrote 50 blog posts every day, for 50 days, people think of the book as so much more important and influential than the other one, even though that's a lot of what it is.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation-grade line of products and solutions. I'm also excited to announce a new long-term partnership with Aporia. Aporia is the ML observability platform for AI products. Now, today, I'm excited to welcome back Tyler Richards. So the last time I had him on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast, he was a data scientist at Meta who just recently published a book on Streamlit. This time around, he actually left Meta to go work at Streamlit. He's published a second edition of the book, and he also has some really interesting ideas and takes around why data scientists aren't as likely as, for example, software engineers to pursue side hustles, different ventures, and things of that sort. So I'm really excited to have him back on the show. We had an awesome conversation about what it's like to join a new company, also what it's like to be at a company that gets purchased, just like how Streamlit was purchased by Snowflake. So tune in for this one. Really interesting conversation. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. So Tyler, welcome back to the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. It's been a while since you came back on, but obviously a lot has changed, and I'm really excited to dive into the new evolution in your career and your life.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me back on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So the last time we left off, you were a data scientist at Meta. You had recently published the book on Streamlit. And now, if I remember correctly, you're not with Meta. You're actually working with Streamlit, now Snowflake. And you've released a second edition of the book. So I would love to just jump in and start with, how did you go from working at Meta to working at Streamlit and then at Snowflake?
Yeah, I mean, great question. It was a very, slightly predictable, but very interesting time where I published the Streamlit book basically because I really liked the product and was just really interested, and that's kind of how I wanted to work on data science. Like, I wanted to work. That was my ideal product. I just wanted to produce Streamlit apps. That's what I really would like. And I was at Meta, and around that time, Streamlit was, call it 20, 25 people, around that range. And they were just starting to make a kind of start up a data science organization. So they had some data science contractors for a time. And then they were like, oh, we should hire some full-time people. So they were just, getting started with kicking up a data science organization. And at that point, because I'd been writing the book for a while, I had a longer standing relationship with some of the early people there. So Adrian is one of the founders, and we would meet regularly and chat, and I would give feedback on the product. And then, just one day he was like, "Hey, Tyler, we're hiring data scientists. If you have enough conviction to write a book about Streamlit, would you consider applying?" And I was like, well, when you say it like that, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. So I went through a nice application process as you would expect. And then I was kind of sitting there, and I had a job at Meta, and I had an offer at Streamlit. And one of my kind of goals forever was, I really want to join kind of an early stage startup. That was just really interesting to me. Just the idea of being able to build something new that didn't exist in the world, and to have such a strong hand in how it was going to change was just a very addictive idea. So I knew I wanted to join a pretty early stage startup at some point. Early stage startups tend not to hire that many data scientists, though. You usually get hired maybe if there's 50 people or 30 people is when you might have your first data science hire. Um, and so because it was a data science product, I think they were a little ahead of the curve and much more supportive of a data science organization, both because it would be really, useful for the company, but also because you could dog food the product, right? We would be the primary consumers. So I was kind of battling this around in my head. I was thinking about it, and I went on a walk with my friend Rob, and I was like, well, so I have this offer from Streamlit. I'm really thinking about doing it, and he was like, are you kidding me? Like, what do you mean you're thinking about this? Like, you love this product, they make this product that you really like, and you've known these people for a while now, and they seem to be good and kind people. So what are you doing? Like, of course you're going to take this. And so then I accepted like the next day. I was like, yeah, all right, I'll do it. that makes sense. And then, yeah, so at that point, Streamit was going into, it had an amazing open source library and was just starting out creating paid products for companies. And we had this product that we called Streamlit Sharing at the time, and now we call it Streamlit Community Cloud. And we had paid versions of that where you could deploy apps and share them. And that was definitely taking off as well. And then during that whole time, we were kind of considering raising another round of fundraising. And then Snowflake came in and just bought us. And so that was very quickly after I started. I think I published the book in maybe November, and then I started in January, and or maybe I published in August, and then I started in January, and we were acquired in like March or April, so like 9 weeks after I started. So all of that happened in the span of, for me, 7 or 8 months, and then now I've been at Snowflake ever since. So that's the long story of how I got from A to B to C to D to now sitting here with you yet again.
Amazing. Well, I can't say enough good things about Adrian. So he was one of the early guests on the
Oh yeah.
podcast, and I really love his perspective and take on the world. And I think that it shows through in the product and the mission, and also the people at Streamlit, his style of leadership and the innovation, well, the innovativeness, and also the sort of reductionist thinking where he always breaks down everything, sort of thinks from first principles. It's a very powerful direction that I think the company will continue to grow in. Something that I am interested in is how was working at Streamlit at a startup different from working at Meta out of the gate? It seems like that was a very big shift to go from one to the other, especially in lieu of the acquisition stuff. But how did your work change? How did your role change? Please tell me about that.
Yeah. I mean, I loved it. I really enjoyed Meta. Like I have no bad things to say about Meta, especially data science at Meta and the integrity organization. Like I really enjoyed being an integrity data scientist there. Um, the con is what everyone says about big companies. It's like, hey, you have a lane. This is your lane. You produce this one thing, and you have to be a really good cog, right? And so if you're you you just need to be more predictable in a big company where, oh, you're just working on this one thing, and maybe in a year or two we can move you on to work on this other thing, and you can do a really good job making this widget or that widget or this dashboard or that dashboard. um, and so there's more flexibility than that. That's kind of an exaggeration, but still that's the gist. um, and I enjoyed it. But moving over to Streamlit, the biggest change is that you have a more clear goal, which is either make money, hire someone, create a new product, whatever the goal of the company is. And then you just have your own skill set and you are really just working towards that goal. So it's very more up in the air about what you're going to be working on any given day. And so things just work significantly faster because they have to work faster. And you have to be much more confident with something being 80% or 90% right. Whereas at Meta, the stakes were a little different and the speed needed to be slower. If I got a confidence interval wrong by 20 or 30%, just the confidence interval wrong by 20 or 30% in a metric that I was producing, The for example, I was at one point I was trying to figure out what is the confidence interval around our hate speech measurement for Arabic versus in Hebrew, because there was a big question about should we are we discriminating against people that speak Arabic or people that speak Hebrew in our hate speech policies, because there was a big question and a big conflict in Israel and Palestine. So we have to really know if our hate speech is the models that we have, if the precision measurements are good or bad or worse or better. And so we really need to know that it to a very fine grained detail. And so you could spend a ton of time exactly on that one measurement. Whereas if you're at a startup, you can do a lot more things and have a little bit less confidence in each one, not a low confidence, but a little bit less confidence, and just move significantly faster. So I find both environments really invigorating, but it was definitely a large switch.
So when you talk about moving into a startup and then essentially moving back into a large company because of the acquisition,
Yeah.
can you tell me a little bit about that process and maybe a little bit about the reason that Snowflake was very interested in Streamlit to begin with?
Yeah. So the core business of Snowflake is it's pretty straightforward. So the idea is Snowflake is not really going to charge you for when you store data in your data warehouse. They're mostly going to charge you for when you start to use it, and they have a consumption-based model. And so if you use your data a lot, you get a bunch of use out of it, Snowflake will charge you more. If you basically don't use your data, then Snowflake is not going to charge you almost anything. And that's like the whole idea. And there's exceptions on the left and the right, but that's a good mental model for Snowflake. So, since Snowflake was founded, it started with let's just move everyone's data. Our goal is to get everyone's data into Snowflake, and then when they actually, start to query it or do anything else with it, then that will make us money, and it'll make our customers happy too. So that was the whole idea. The story of Snowflake over the course of the past 2 years is, well, we have this very effective warehouse that also has a lot of compute that we can use mainly for running SQL on top of your data. But what if we took all this other work that is happening that you're doing with your data outside of Snowflake, and what if we allowed you to do it inside of your data warehouse without having to take it out and do that compute somewhere else? So you could do kind of everything that you want to do on your data, whether it's, you have a DBT model that is running. We want your DBT model running on top of Snowflake. So if you have like a nice chart or an analysis that you want to do, like we want that to happen inside of Snowflake, so that you can have all the security and all of basically it's just way easier once you only need to have one place for all of your data. And if you move the work to the data, it's significantly easier. So that's like the mental model that you should kind of have for Snowflake's past couple of years. And you see a whole bunch of examples of that. Like, for example, Snowpark. Snowpark is basically a way to run Spark and Python jobs inside of your Snowflake account. And so before, you were only able to run SQL, and a lot of people wanted to run things in other languages. And so Snowflake said, totally fine, we'll make a big change so that you can actually run the languages that you want to run inside of your Snowflake account. You don't have to like have it leave and go to an entirely other space, another cloud provider to run your job. So that's the general mental model for how you should think about Snowflake. So then the question is, how does Streamlit come in, right? Where Streamlit is like, well, we have this amazing app framework where you can write a few lines of Python and then all of a sudden get this really interactive app where you can show it to your user and they can mess around with the checkboxes and the sliders and the text inputs. And then behind the scenes, you can be running a whole bunch of different SQL queries so that people can do a lot of self-serve analytics, and you can just have better dashboards. So that's the general idea of Streamlit. And so the Snowflake's idea was, well, what if we just had a Streamlit app that was running inside of Snowflake? It is like significantly more complicated than that, but take your Streamlit app and run it inside of Snowflake so that all of your role-based permissions can live there, so your data never leaves the place that you already know that it's safe. It's already in that security boundary. All the sharing works with all the Snowflake accounts that you already have. If you have data sharing with other companies, let's say you buy weather data from someone else, it goes into your Snowflake account. You don't have to worry about any of that. You don't have to worry about setting up your own warehouses so that you can run your Streamlit apps. Everything just kind of works, and you can write your Streamlit apps and have it sit there. So that was kind of the big reason for Snowflake buying Streamlit. There's a whole bunch of other benefits that we've seen over the course of the past year and a half. For example, like we haven't even talked about anything related to large language models, and basically everyone and their mother is using large language models, and they're using them in Streamlit. Like Streamlit is a great large language model framework without even intending to be. It just happens to be because Python is the language of large language models. Everyone's messing around with Python whenever they're doing calling from like OpenAI's API, and they do it within Streamlit apps. So that's kind of a long answer to the general question, but that's like the whole gist for the acquisition, is at least as far as the lowly data scientist can understand.
Let's take a second to hear from one of our amazing sponsors that supports the show. Ever wonder how to keep your AI models not just smart, but responsible and effective? That's why I've partnered with Aporia. Their AI performance platform offers full-scale observability and real-time AI guardrails. Trust me, if you're in the data science field, Aporia's got your back. Don't miss out. Check them out at aporia.com. This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation-grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high-performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z8 workstation. I really love that the Z workstations can come standard with Linux or WSL2, and they can be configured with the Data Science Software Stack Manager. With the Software Stack Manager, you can get right to the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show. So before we get into how the acquisition was for you and the employee experience, I'm interested into how Snowflake fits into the larger ecosystem. For example, with Microsoft, with Amazon, and with Google, who are essentially owning a lot of the same things, but it doesn't seem like they're hyper focusing on the data in the same way. So what is the unique value out of Snowflake compared to those, and maybe even compared to Databricks or some of the other products that are in a similar space?
Yeah, I would say the interesting thing is that Snowflake is built as a cloud native solution. And so one of the big deltas was that it's entirely cloud native, where you can't really have a bunch of on-premises data. It's just cloud stuff. And actually, Snowflake also doesn't own its own physical servers at all. It rents server space from AWS and GCP and Azure. And so we have these big long-term partnerships with the big cloud providers, and essentially say, hey, you guys aren't that good at writing data warehouse software, and you're much better at the other things that you're already pretty good at. Like where AWS is like very, very good at having a bunch of APIs and having 100,000 products that you can potentially use to mess around with your data. That's what they're really good at, right? Google's a really good consumer company. Google has a harder time like selling to businesses for sure than other folks. And so Snowflake's whole thing is, hey, we're very good at this very one specific thing, which is data science and data engineering workloads. And we're only one product. So within AWS, there's like 1,000, maybe way more than 1,000 products. It's really hard to understand like what you're actually doing. With Snowflake, there's only one product to buy, and there's only one product that you're ever going to buy. It's just Snowflake. You can do a whole bunch of different things in it. You don't have to worry about, should I have my stuff on an EC2 cluster, EC2 instance, or should I use one of their 17 other products that is like cloud native stuff? So Snowflake is just, we will fiddle with all the knobs so that you don't have to think about the fact that there are knobs, and we will do our very best to make the right decision in twiddling all these little knobs so that you don't have to really think about it. All the way down to the fact of, we will try and make sure that your Streamlit app runs as effectively as we possibly can, um, given what you're actually running, where you're running, who you're sharing it with, like where your account actually is. So we will try to handle all of the infrastructure for you and make the optimal decision for you without you having to like really think about it at all. So that's kind of the differentiation for Snowflake is ease and quality and the singularity of like just one product to purchase.
Interesting. So it seems like there's a little bit of a conflict, and I'd love for you to walk me through this. So it seems like Snowflake is trying to, and we talked a little bit offline, trying to vertically
Yeah.
integrate, right? Where you're bringing in Streamlit, you're bringing in these other things to own the entire experience with the customer. But at the same time, Snowflake is outsourcing where the data is stored to some of these larger companies. And also, Streamlit itself is kind of a product that's focused on the opposite of vertical integration, democratizing use across different types of libraries and things along those lines. How does all of that fit together? It doesn't have to fit together neatly. I'm just curious because it seems like there's not necessarily competing forces, but there's somewhat competing ideology across that whole
Yeah.
overarching mission.
Yeah, I would say it makes a lot of sense for me from the Snowflake to like AWS and Azure side, where Snowflake benefits a lot from infrastructure improvements that Amazon is going to make. And so the idea is that they will continue to make these awesome infrastructure improvements and we will pass along those savings to our customers as much as we can. Amazon really has a great relationship and says, hey, we actually appreciate you buying all of this compute for in these big, large, many-year contracts. And just handing us a bunch of money up front saying, yeah, we know we want this server space in 2.5 years. And so Amazon has I would say definitely a more friendly relationship with Snowflake than you would think from the start. I also only know this not from anything that is like internal. This is just all external related, like what do I think from first principles type of thing. It's even easier for me to explain like the Streamlit relationship, right? Where Snowflake actually has a reasonable history in open source software. So, for example, one big thing that Snowflake is messing around with is Apache Iceberg, which is an open source project that Snowflake now supports. And Streamlit is just kind of another iteration of that, where it's um, it's to the huge advantage of Snowflake to make sure that Streamlit stays open source, free, that we push all of the newest features that we possibly can to the open source community so that they can mess around with it, so that individual data scientists can make apps. Right now, what we have is we have this product called Streamlit Community Cloud. It's totally free. You can go and like upload your own Streamlit apps, write your own code, share it with as many people as you want. You don't have to pay a cent. We pay for all that compute ourselves just because it is a massive advantage for data scientists to learn how to make Streamlit apps. Because when they start to go, you start to work for, one of the companies that uses our product inside of Snowflake, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I know Streamlit already. I'm actually really productive right off the bat because I've messed around with Streamlit Community Cloud, because I've made my own little apps, like on the side. And I already know, and now all of a sudden my data is right here within Snowflake. I don't have to deal with any of the database connections that are really annoying, and all the compute is just sitting there. And then I have this beautiful path towards being a great data scientist at my company. And once I'm a great data scientist at my company, people say, I want to see more data science stuff. This is really cool. All of a sudden, it's a more data focused company than it was before. And people are writing more queries, seeing more information, messing around with your Streamlit apps. And kind of, it's a very like remarkably win-win-win situation in my mind. We've also like kind of definitely pledged that we're very focused on the open source side. There's a lot of other companies that, because of the way that they're structured, they have a big advantage about hiding features and making their open source version like kind of bad. Um, and just like none of those incentives are that useful for us. Like right now, the situation is the open source Streamlit has way more features than the one that we have internally, because we want to test them out in the community, let people mess around with them, let people make really cool new apps, and then give us feedback on it. And then once we like know that a feature is good or useful, then we start to integrate it to within our like paid and company product. So at least the way that I see it is, I see it as a big a big win-win at the moment.
It probably goes the other direction too, is that if you're in an organization and they're saying, hey, we want to decide between Snowflake and another product, if Streamlit is integrated and data scientists are comfortable using Streamlit and know the capabilities and the flexibility, they're probably more likely or inclined to recommend Snowflake because of that integration going the other
Yeah.
direction.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I will say Snowflake would not have paid the money that it did if they didn't think that they were going to get something out of it. Like that is definitely true. Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, that's what I would do, right? Like, I love building Streamlit apps. I want that as my primary, like, data science product. So if I'm ever in a buying situation, call it 15 years down the line, they fire me tomorrow, I go and I start my own firm. Even in that situation, I'm like, yeah, I would actually like to buy Snowflake because it's so easy to like make Streamlit apps in that, because it's just, of course, they have all the Streamlit people. Who is going to make a better Streamlit experience other than the Streamlit team? Like, Adrian and Amanda and Tiago are all just making Streamlit app stuff all day. So it's a really big boon.
So tell me about the transition from essentially startup to acquired startup. What are
Yeah.
things like logistically? How does work change? I'm sure it's not all good, but I'm sure that there was also some benefits that are associated with that.
Yeah. I think I had a big advantage because I had a lot of experience at a place like Meta, right? Where I have an understanding of how big companies work, how management chains work, what a reorg would look like. I had I'm not no expert on any of these things, but I had some understanding of like how big company data science style things feel, and how a big product organization interacts with a big engineering organization. So it's a little easier coming. If I was in a situation where I'd only been working at startups for the past 10 years, and then I got in a startup that was acquired, there would be a big culture shock for me. But at least for me personally, I was totally, um, there wasn't that much stuff that was unexpected. Um, the acquisitions in general are kind of, I feel like they're under talked about in the industry, especially on the data science side. If I had to know one thing about an acquisition, and I could tell you a whole bunch, if I just like, what is a maximal, like, what is a maximal piece of information that I could actually get if I just knew one thing? The answer would be cost per employee by far. Like, if that's the only thing that I would like really want. And I don't know if this is exactly true, but everything else that is decided in an acquisition is downstream of how much did the person pay per employee of the acquired company. So, for example, Mode earlier, they got bought for $2 million per employee, versus Mosaic. They also got bought earlier. They got bought for $21 million per employee by Databricks. So if I'm thinking about those two things, regardless of which final price was bigger, the price per employee is important, because it's a reflection of what do they want your company for? Do they want your company because they really believe in the movement of the company? Do they want it to be a fundamental part of your infrastructure going forward? Or are they really just buying it for a few key people that they think are going to be beneficial for this other thing that they want? In a situation where, you're a Looker or a Tableau where you're like $4 million per employee, then you're in the situation of probably somewhere in the middle between those two things, where they definitely want it for the product, but it's already a little bit more established than than other products out there, and so they might just want it for kind of the cash, and like the growth trajectory over time a little bit. So yeah, that's the biggest thing that I didn't understand. Is I would talk to different people that had gone through different acquisition processes, and some people would say, "Oh, wow, everyone left after 9 months because they didn't like the big company culture," or other people would say, yeah, it was a really awesome experience. Like my organization was like really valued, and we got all this, all these new engineers, and we had this amazing process. And I was like, wow, maybe it's just like hit or miss between those two things without realizing, oh, one of those people got acquired for $1.5 million per employee, and the other one got acquired for $11 million per employee. So yeah, they're just like very different things. The more that a company spends on you, the more they're going to want to like change their product vision based on, um, based on your product vision.
It also seems so. I had a friend that joined Tableau right after the acquisition, and a big company merging with another massive company has a lot more overhead in terms of cultural change and changing systems and things along those lines than, for example, a 25-person company. And I think that there's a whole business of people consulting on those organizational transitions and things along those lines for a reason, because shifting that many people and ideologically and getting the systems aligned can be an overwhelmingly difficult process, although still a useful process. But in terms of that Tableau acquisition, for example, I don't think it has gone well. I haven't really heard about new
No,
innovation
I was going
from
to say,
Tableau, right?
yeah, it's just really hard. It's like they have a different culture. And if you have that many people, I mean, Tableau was big when they got bought. They were very large. They had a massive sales organization. And when you start to think about any intricacies related to this, you're like, all right, they have a massive sales organization already. That means those salespeople have contracts with people that have already have been paying money for Tableau. And those salespeople continue to make money as the people start to pay for Tableau. The question is, what happens to the cost of Tableau post acquisition? If you're a 50-person company, you like there's not that much at stake relative to the thing that's at stake is just the acquisition price. Like that is the most important thing, and the equity is like mostly already decided, and maybe there's some other retention bonuses that are paid out, but that is the money situation. But if you're in Tableau's seat, someone might be making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just in their sales commission for Tableau. So all of a sudden, the decision of, well, should we change the price of Tableau or should we keep the price of Tableau? And should we match the sales commission for all the salespeople relative to what the salespeople at GCP are paid, or something else? Like all of these start to become much harder questions the bigger that you are. And so I do not envy the people that all day they just work on mergers and acquisitions, and especially post merger and acquisition. Like the 6 months after is like a really hard gig. Yeah, much easier. I think we were 40. Don't quote me on this. We were in the dozens of people when we got acquired. So it's a relatively small number of people.
Yeah, it seems to me, just from a lot of the books and stuff or podcasts I've been listening to recently, there is probably a sweet spot for acquisition. And then after that, it is probably not worth it. And, you hear about, for example, the Snap founder not selling to Facebook. There's probably a threshold
Tough
where it's
call.
not worth it for Facebook slash Meta to purchase, because the operational overhead would eat into the profitability or the integration or any of these types of things. And it's interesting to think about, what is that threshold? What makes sense for a specific company? It probably depends on the size of both companies, but
Yeah.
not a problem I've looked into that much. But it'd be interesting to see research on, you know, when is the best time to acquire for a company, and if you miss that threshold, what are the implications of the repercussions? Because I have to imagine there are definitely some implications
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah. I mean, even the question of like, okay, I am a data science manager at a startup that has 500 people that got bought, and it got bought for $2.5 million per employee. And do I have a job? Like, am I going to get kept around? Is my job more important or less important than it was before? Am I just going to be one data science manager amongst all the other data science managers? What happens to my level? And does that change if we got bought for $4 million per employee? What about 10? What about 15? Like those those just are, I really don't know. Like I don't have a intricate, like an intricate enough understanding. And I think the reason why very few people have an intricate enough understanding is that the people that know the most are M&A lawyers and M&A firms. Like M&A finance people, they know the most about how all these things actually work. And they're never going to tell you anything because they make so much money off of every one of these transactions. And so it's like they're never going to tell anyone how, like, what is actually, what these processes actually look like, because there's literally no advantage for that ever to happen. There's also no advantage for the acquiring firm to ever say anything other than this acquisition was really, really awesome. Like very few people ever go like, oh man, that didn't work out. Sorry. They'll be like, oh yeah, strategically it was a good decision at the time. And then, yada, yada, yada. So there's no incentive for anyone to talk about these sort of things in any sort of an open format. So that's why we don't hear about it. And that's why we don't know, if I had to guess.
Yeah. Well, the third parties that manage a ton of the acquisitions and mergers and things along those lines, they also don't necessarily have a great understanding of technology integration, especially now
Right? Yeah.
as technology integration gets increasingly complex and people are wed or not wed to different infrastructures, architectures, whatever that might be. I
Yep.
project that more and more mergers or acquisitions will fail in the future just because those two parties are, one, the incentives aren't necessarily aligned. One, the incentives are just to get a deal done versus to make a deal successful. But also just because there's that gap in knowledge about how these things merge together. Essentially,
Yeah.
historically, I don't think that was as big a deal. It was more about culture and shifting those things. Now it's about culture, incentive, alignment, how people are valued or used, and also about how technology integrates. And that to me is a very, very challenging puzzle to solve.
Yeah. I mean, you hear about it, right? When Google bought YouTube, there was this famous all hands where they were, the Google leadership was asked at one point. They were like, "Hey, did we pay too much? Like, I think we paid way too much for YouTube, or do you think we paid the right amount?" And they basically said, "There's no way that we paid the right amount. We either paid way too much or we paid way too little, and there's no chance that we actually nailed this price." So it's either worth nothing or it's worth like $100 billion. And in YouTube's situation, it turns out that it's $100 billion. Like that is a very profitable, very profitable part of Google at the moment. But I think that's an underrated part of just acquisitions in general. Is like the price is just like you got to think of it like a venture round more than you do about buying a Taco Bell in Orlando, Florida. Like this is not a cash flowing property in the same way that you're thinking about it. So your price is just inevitably going to be wrong on any given transaction.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because it is like a venture round in some sense, but you also have to integrate these companies into your larger
Yeah,
organization, which makes it
yeah,
so that, in venture, it's like, oh, we can, if we have the capital, we can take on 30, 40 different investments. Even if you have the capital in one of these companies, you can't buy that many companies because it just makes it really confusing for culture and infrastructure. And so there's
yeah,
a
exactly.
very unique element to acquisition that maybe I'll have some M&A person on just to explain this to me, because that would be a really fun, with your perspective and then their perspective, how it works from the top level.
Um,
Yeah, it's such a dynamic and confusing problem, but it all does eventually trickle down to the individual employees. And I appreciate you sharing sort of your experience of like, oh, this is different, but it's also a little bit of the same, right?
Yeah, yeah. I would say my overall experience is like the things that I would have liked to know beforehand were you can, of course, the expectation has to be that things are going to change about your daily life, about the either the people that you report to or the team that you work with, and the more um, the more that the organization, like, or some organizations will do a very, very good job about trying to keep the same teams together and trying to keep the reporting structures in a way that makes sense for the early team. And then but of course there's just obviously going to be changes in the things that you probably care about, like location, and different workplace policies. And you kind of have to go in with an open mind, and not be in the space of, oh, nothing can possibly change about like the way that I've been working, because I really like it or something. That it's just like very, very unlikely to happen that over the course of the long term that nothing is going to change. So yeah, biggest thing to expect is some sort of delta, for sure.
Change is the only constant, which I
Yep.
think embodies a lot of things. So, speaking of changes, you did make quite a few changes to your book on Streamlit. I'm interested in what that process was like, especially relating to a platform slash product that moves so fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I got to the point where so I wrote the first version of Streamlit. It was on Streamlit for data science. It was on Streamlit version 0.82 or something, maybe 8.7. I forget exactly what version, but it was in, pre 1.0. And at the moment, Streamlit is on 1.26 or 1.27 at the recording of this. So there's been a lot of changes. There's been 40 versions since I had written the book, and there are so many changes to the library, such that I had stopped recommending it to people as a resource for learning. And so the book publisher reached out and they were like, "Hey, are you thinking about doing another version?" I was kind of considering it and kind of not. I was really on the fence about it. And then after thinking it over, I was like, I really like the way that I want to learn technical topics is I want one continuous learning process for that technical topic. If I'm going to learn, you know, statistics, right? If I'm going to learn about some specific branch of statistics, I don't want to read like 6 different Medium articles about statistics. I just want to read one longer post where I can sit down, I can take notes on it, I can understand, where everything builds on top of the other thing. I'm not like, the way that I think about it is I don't like to learn like layering, slices of Swiss cheese on top of each other and hoping there are no holes straight down to the bottom. I like to just have a consistent learning experience. Um, and so because of that, I decided to write a second version. And the second version is really a reflection of all the stuff that I learned making Streamlit apps basically every single day since I wrote the first version. So while I was at Meta, I produced Streamlit apps for Meta in part, but most people didn't consume Streamlit apps. It wasn't like a big part of my workflow. But obviously, since moving to Streamlit and at Snowflake, that's my entire workflow. Like the product that I create is large multi-page Streamlit apps that tons of people consume internally. And so I had all this stuff that I wanted to say about Streamlit, all these, the accumulation of these tiny little bits of knowledge that I've had from just, using it a lot. And so I decided to make an update. So maybe half of it is different than it was the first go around. It uses all the new Streamlit features that we have. There's the experimental data editor, as well as all of the connections to the different large language model libraries. So there's a section on there on on OpenAI and making your own LLM related Streamlit apps. There's new updates for the different libraries and the different components that I really like to use, and the different databases that I connect with, which wasn't in the first one. So there's just all this stuff that I learned over the course of a year and a half of just making Streamlit apps all day. So yeah, that's the gist of it.
I love that. I mean, there were so many new features that I loved. For example, being able to pass in like a private key for an API. That's awesome. Before, you had to do some convoluted stuff to be able to access databases or anything that you've built. I've loved the new sort of chatbot style feature for integrating with large language models. I had some fun experimenting with
Yeah.
that. So there's just a lot of really cool and interesting new stuff. I could talk all day about all of the new features and how I like to use Streamlit. I am interested in a couple things. So first, I'm interested. Well, let's stay on the Streamlit topic. How has the product
Yeah.
changed? I know essentially I was trying to do some like B2B work with Streamlit, having a private app and things along those lines. And it seems like right now you're in the process of essentially closing that down and then opening it up in the future again. I'm interested what the experience has been like with that. And then I'd love to hear about your experience with a book and if you do another one.
Yeah. So I would say on the first one, so as I mentioned before, pre Snowflake, the idea was we have an open source product and then we continue producing that open source product. And the thing that we actually sell is, okay, do you want to host your Streamlit apps somewhere? Do you want to have a private place to share them? That is what is going to be the paid product. And so we had this thing called Streamlit Sharing, where you could have some free options. So you could have a few public apps here and there, and then you could graduate, start paying for it, and then you could have private apps. You could have all these other features that we were building on top of it. And then after we got acquired by Snowflake, that paid product didn't really make a whole lot of sense anymore because our whole pitch was, hey, we actually want this to run inside of Snowflake so that it had all of your data right there. And so the change that we made is we made Streamlit Community Cloud totally free so that you could create as many public apps as you would like. And you can use it as hey, we're going to just host your Streamlit apps for you. But if you're trying to run a business if you're trying to like use this as a business, the suggested solution what that we are creating is on Snowflake. So Streamlit and Snowflake is the product name. And so we basically shut down the like B2B, B2C versions, that anything that we were taking money on the Streamlit side, and migrated that entirely into Snowflake. That said, we still spend a lot of time creating educational materials for people that want to host their Streamlit apps elsewhere. So if you want to host it just on AWS or on Heroku or something and use all of their features on top of that, you totally can. But yeah, I mean, as someone that builds stuff all the time, I would say the simplest and kind of like best solution for hosting it as your own kind of, if you're a professional data scientist, is within the Snowflake environment.
Amazing. That makes a lot of sense. I was just curious. I was trying to make a
Yeah.
private one for something I was showing
Yeah.
internally, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." Aside from that, I'd love to learn a little bit more about the book writing process. I think we touched on that a lot in the previous episode, but I am interested, if you were presented the opportunity again to write a book, would you do it?
Well, so yeah, great question. Tough question, really tough because it's so contextual, right? Where if I'm trying, if my goal is, hey, Ken, I want to make money. Like I'm really interested in money right now. And I was like, oh, I'm thinking about writing a book. Should I write a book? You should tell me no. No, don't do that. Books are like, especially books with a publisher, are a very, very difficult business, and you're not going to make tons of money doing that. So the answer is money. You should definitely not do that. If the answer is some sort of like, there's a level of, and we talked about this a bit offline, but for some reason, people have, if you say that, oh, I wrote a book, or oh, I wrote 50 blog posts every day, for 50 days, people think of the book as so much more important and influential than the other one, even though that's a lot of what it is, especially for a technical book. So if you're doing it for kind of that side of things, then it definitely could make sense. The the thing that I have been, kind of like racking away in my brain a little bit is when I'm thinking about creating books or not writing other books is, do I have something that I think is not just a little worth it, but like ridiculously worth it? Do I think it's something that I would be proud of and proud to tell other people, hey, you should get this? And in that case, with this version, I'm really happy with. Like I've spent a lot of time on it, and yeah, I'm definitely like proud of this work. And so if I get in the situation where I feel like I have a lot of knowledge sitting in my head, and I just like, for some reason, I don't want to just blog about it instead, and it makes much more sense to have it in one consistent format, then I think a book as a format makes a whole lot of sense. In I don't know if I'll do it through a publishing company again. My publisher has been great; they've been awesome for sure. But I do appreciate the ability of just to be able to like do something entirely on your own, like from start to finish, like hiring your own folks to do editing and taking all of the potential upside of a situation, not just like financially, but also like from the experience, like the experience upside as well. Um, it's kind of a convoluted way of saying probably not, but that's my best way of of saying it. I think it's unlikely. I have a strong suspicion that there are going to be really amazing Streamlit books like written over the course of the next year. And I know a few people that are writing them, and I'm so excited to see them. I have the personal goal of basically being able to tell people, hey, just stop buying my book altogether. Go to these people that really spend all their days like writing books and writing technical books, and just like take it from them. They're so good at this. They have made something that's so much better than I have. And then I can kind of go along my way and not write any more Streamlit books. That's my personal goal.
Well, I think writing books on technical topics is pretty interesting, especially because technical topics change so much. Have you thought or
Yeah.
considered, hey, why don't I make living documentation with examples that can iterate more quickly? I mean, I found that when reviewing some of the books that I went through to learn data science. Oh, this doesn't work anymore because we're now using TensorFlow 2.0 or whatever it is, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
this is not useless, but the approach that I was taking is fundamentally different now.
Yeah. So the first thing that I did differently in this iteration of Streamlit for data science than the last one is I tried to make it much more about like the principles of like the fundamentals of Streamlit. Like, as you know, Streamlit's not going to change its execution model in the next 5 years. Like, I will can say that pretty confidently. Like, it is going to, the fundamentals of the architecture are going to be pretty similar. There's going to be a lot of things that are like on top of it, great new additions, but the underlying architecture is like pretty stable. And so there's not going to be that much delta there. And so I spent a lot more time on the, hey, here's how you get like a understanding of what Streamlit is, so that on top of that, the decisions that you're making on how you're building your applications comes from that from fundamental understanding. Whereas that when the first version, I mean, honestly, I understood Streamlit less well than I do now, because I didn't work at the company and I didn't build Streamlit apps like, all day, every day. I did it as a hobby on the side. And so I spent a lot more time that way. The other thing that I end up doing is I strongly encourage people to start with the Streamlit documentation. So if you go to docs.streamlit.io, the documentation is amazing. Like, we have a really good documentation team. There's Debbie Matthews, who like is a relative newcomer, but she does an amazing job. And then Snehan is another documentation person that is like, one of the OGs and has been working on it for a while. And the documentation is so beautiful. I go to it all the time and I really enjoy it. And so I push people to that all the time because it's just so good. And then if they don't have if they basically can't grab like what is going on, or it's like, oh, this is actually, I want something in one big package, then I say, maybe give the book a shot, but definitely start with the documentation before you even like think about buying anything. Um, in terms of would I create something that is like a living, breathing documentation site, or a big example site, I think I'll probably leave that to the Streamlit documentation team. I think they'll probably come out with something that is like very similar. They have a very nice getting started page that's 6 or 7 pages long. That's really nice, and helps people kind of Streamlit 101 their way through things. But yeah, I look forward to an explosion of content and a continued explosion of content in the Streamlit space.
Yeah, when is the Streamlit documentation just going to be a Streamlit app that lets you use a large language model to ask it questions? Come on.
Yeah. Oh man. So yeah, great question. That would be so fun. And already, like, I don't know if you've messed around with it, but ChatGPT And even like Llama 2, like Code Llama, is they're really good at making Streamlit apps because Python, because it's all top down, right? And because it's start to finish, and the fundamental building blocks are pretty straightforward, and a lot of Streamlit apps are all on one file. And so all of these things point to Streamlit being a really easy um, like framework to make apps for large language models. So large language models can make you a really amazing Streamlit app. There's a company out there called HAL9, and their whole thing is, yeah, we'll just make you type in your natural language, you show us where your data is, and we'll make a Streamlit app for you. And it's good. Like, it's surprisingly good. It's a really nice product. But yeah, you should, I'm gonna honestly just ask ChatGPT or go to HAL9 and try it out, because man, it's good.
Well, I was going to say, like, so LangChain, their documentation has a chat bot where you can ask it questions and it'll give you code snippets and stuff. It doesn't work as well as you think it would, but they've at least experimented with the concept. I always find that stuff pretty interesting. So, in a similar vein of the projects and creating products around Streamlit apps, we talked a little offline about making money as a data scientist or hacking products together. And you expressed that there isn't as many data scientists as you would think creating products using data science as a side hustle or building things. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the big questions that I've been thinking about it's been racking my brain for like, a year or maybe even 2 years is, okay, software engineers, they have their own little side projects and they make money on them online. Whether it's $10 a month or whether it's $1,000 a month, or you have people making like millions of dollars online in their own different software engineering projects. And data scientists just don't, like, we just don't have that. If you look at a lot of folks that are data scientists that are trying to make money on the side, you tend to see lots of people that will do consulting projects, right? You talk about this at all. Yeah. YouTube, right? People make their own YouTube apps so they can teach other people how to make data science videos, and then they get the ad revenue off that. And it's like, wait, like, is this, or they sell courses, right? Like course sales, or you'll help people interview, and teach people data science to help people interview for different firms, right? Those are the tried and true paths. But what you don't see is like, hey, I made this Streamlit app that has this really cool analysis on this machine learning model that I made. So now if you get access to it, you can pay me $10 a month, and you don't see that person making any money. Like, that doesn't exist. And so there's three things that I was like, well, maybe these things are happening. These might be the reasons. One, data science is not actually that useful, and people won't actually pay for it because it's not worth it. Yeah, it's an option we always got to consider, right? The second option is data science is only useful inside organizations. Like, organizations just spit off data, right? And so without all that data, wreckage, right? We call it data pipelines for a reason, because it's like, we're going through the sewage a lot. So, if work might not be useful outside of organizations, and that might be the reasons why people don't actually like make money on this stuff. Then there's a third option, which is like, okay, it's a talent problem. Like, we're actually just kind of bad software engineers. And so we can't make anything, pretty enough or useful enough, just because, yeah, we either like can't make a fully fledged app, or we want to sell someone a Jupyter notebook, and it's like no one would buy that. Like, what is a form of things that people would actually purchase? That's tricky, right? So, yeah, so I've been trying to like figure out like, why does that exist, and I haven't been able to really. I still don't know. So if you know, just let me know. Slide into my Twitter DMs. But anyway, I created this thing that I just called ST Paywall, which was a way for you to make a subscription Streamlit app. So you can basically put a paywall and a Google login in front of your Streamlit app and say, hey, I have this cool large language model application. I have this special super prompt that I've spent all this time like creating. I'm not going to show you what that prompt is. I'm not going to sell you the prompt. But if you want to mess around with my little app, you can. It's going to cost you $5 a month. And previously that wasn't possible in Streamlit because the login experience is a little difficult because of the Streamlit execution model. And then no one had created like a way to accept Stripe payments in Streamlit yet. So I kind of messed around with both of those and then made a Python library to try it out. And so far, there have been quite a few people that have used it. And yeah, it's been interesting, but it's been just a problem that I still don't exactly know the answer to. I don't know. Do you know the answer? Like, why don't I mean, as a data science YouTuber, right? Like, what is the path to making money as a data scientist? And you consult, you do data science projects, and you also do YouTube. So, is
Well,
that the
this is
answer?
actually pretty interesting from my perspective as well. So I think a lot of people do data science as projects, and they're building systems to give advice or make recommendations rather than building products. And I think we're in the midst of a transition to productized data
Yeah,
science. And so
that's a
I'm
good
actually
point.
going to be making a video in a couple months about why, data science projects are dead. And that's because we're moving significantly more towards products. And with tools like ChatGPT, with tools like Streamlit, with tools that are out there now, it's easier to create products than ever. But I think that that is a cultural change going on within the space. And so inherently, software engineers are always building products. That's their day one. That is the modus operandi
Yeah,
of what they do. But data scientists are not wired that way, or historically, they're not built in that sense. And I think that the data scientists that do build things, they come from a more of an engineering background, and they're transitioning towards data science away from more infrastructure and things along those lines. So I think you do kind of nail it. Is that it's maybe it's not necessarily that data scientists are not good engineers, but that hasn't necessarily been the focus of the work
yeah,
until recently. Or maybe it has
yeah,
been in the dashboarding and things along those lines, but building a dashboard is still selling an insight or a diagnostic or
yeah,
feedback. It is not creating a product that necessarily creates tangible value. And I think that that transition is happening as we speak, and we're still probably on the early stage of that. So again, I think that it seems like you're in the right ballpark. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. But Tyler, those are really all the questions I had. I super enjoyed this. Do you have any parting words of advice? Any final thoughts or recommendations? And then how can people learn more and get in touch with you?
yeah. First thing, pip install Streamlit. Just try it out. See what you think. I'm a huge fan of the product. Obviously, I spend tons of my time working on it now. Go ahead and give it a shot, and we love feedback on our forums and on Twitter and things. So that's a primary thing. And then yeah, if you want to buy the book, we'll toss a link in wherever this
Yep, in
goes.
the
We'll
description.
toss
Yep.
a link somewhere, yeah, descriptions or something. And then I always say, like, if you can't afford the book, you can just DM me on Twitter and I'll just send you a copy. That's I've definitely been in that spot too, where I couldn't afford technical books, and that would suck if that's the only thing that stops you from learning about Streamlit. So and then one last thing is, I kind of felt weird about publishing a book and also working at the company that owned Streamlit. Like that kind of felt like, I don't it felt weird ethically to me. So I'm donating all the proceeds for this book to Pie Ladies. So I'm not just making cash on this thing. It's I just really enjoy it. I like doing it, which makes me a little bit more psycho than you would expect. But yeah, so that's the gist of it. I mean, Ken, I have a great time talking to you in front of a video camera or off. So thanks for having me on again.
Always a pleasure. Well, hopefully we'll meet up again in person. We saw each other in Utah earlier this year, and that was a blast. So
Hmm.
looking forward to that. And thank you again for coming on.